继续 Braid 时空幻境周年重制版的开发者解说部分 ，Commentary， 这应该算是天坑。上一期打了一期的 Design， 我觉得才看了多少20%，有可能吗？它虽然分成5部分，但我相信5部分应该不是一样长的，有些部分可能讨论的东西更多一点。然后当你5个看完，中间的东西可能会解锁。买一个来吧，反正先把这个 Design 看完，关键是要有条理。先还在这个独白部分 monologues， 并且它不光有这个能看的，有些关其实是新的关是能让你玩的。这算看完了，这个算搞定，这个算搞定。对，那就按顺序。下一个，making exceptions to your own rules。tingling 啊，这叫 tingling 啊，当然先把这关看一下，这哪关来呢？啊，这是内关是吧？这还能正常通关？这关他是感觉就死过瘾的。先看一下有没有别的这个 chat box。啊，对，这是回不去了。那看来只有这儿了。来吧。
The initial motivation for this puzzle began with the vision of things being rewound very quickly. And in this game, the objects beside the player that can move of their own accord are usually hostile. They're bullets, they're monsters, rabbits, and whatnot. And so the image is of a bunch of these flying around as you rewind very quickly. And why are they flying around? Well, you could just have them flying through space that the player doesn't ever move through, but that seems weird and strange. And it just seems more fun to have the player dodge them. And I got to do a fun thing previously mentioned where you get to dodge things twice due to the geometry of the level, and anytime as a level designer that you get a chance to do something like that, it feels good, it feels interesting. And so I felt that in this particular case it was okay to do what was mostly an action puzzle, but at the same time I tuned it so that it was not super hard, right? It's certainly not the only exception as well. So there's, oh man, what's the level?
I want to say that Brian Moriarty specifically pointed out in one of his lectures that he was unable to complete one of the monster hunts.
Yes, but those are a little bit different. Like, those are actually trying to be just the basic puzzle, but you have to bounce off the same monster multiple times. And that could be difficult. That's more like an unavoidable reflex-based thing. But there is other stuff in the game. For example, the time when you get chased by large hordes of bunnies for a short distance and then hopefully manage to get them mostly shot by a cannon. That was also just a thing I did because it was fun. And so here's the thing about games is, like, you're allowed to make exceptions sometimes. And in fact, if you don't, maybe your thing doesn't have as much life as it would if you allow yourself to do the things that are the most fun and the most interesting at any particular time. But it can be hard to justify, like when trying to explain to somebody, like, why did you do this? I mean, I feel like that's what people are going to say about this commentary a lot. Like, you said this over here, but I can point at this thing. And it's like, yeah, there are exceptions. This is not a game of ironclad consistency everywhere. And I think that's just part of what makes it interesting.
Making exceptions to your own rules. Perhaps we could have done better showing you some types of gameplay state. 啊，这个就是 hunt 是吧？就这一个。啊，这是内关是吧？
Braid is often pretty good about making relevant gameplay information visible, so that the player is not confused and can successfully solve puzzles. But over the course of development, in order to design puzzles, some configurable behavior was added to some entities that was invisible. Essentially, these are hidden variables that actually matter to gameplay. I was unsure how to address these visually at the time because the design decisions were so in flux, it seemed like they might change completely. And also, early ideas about how to visualize these pieces of information seemed heavyweight and maybe more confusing than helpful. Ultimately, these cases were left unhandled, but in retrospect, I'd like it more if I had done something there. The most impactful hidden variable is that each cannon that fires monsters has a limit of how many live monsters are permitted at one time. When that many monsters are alive, the cannon fuse will stop recharging, so the cannon will no longer fire. This matters a lot in terms of solving the puzzles, but it seemed too complex to put a visual monster counter on the cannons, and hey, I had a lot of other work to do. Actually, though, it could have been nice if the cannons displayed a monster counter in the same style as the monster gate on Hunt, with little icons on the side. Maybe when you jump on the monster, it gets crossed off and fades out. Another major piece of hidden state is that some monsters walk off the edges of platforms, but other monsters turn around and go the other way to avoid
对的，对。
falling. There's no visual indicator of which behavior
你
a
只能
monster
尝试。
has. You just have to figure it out by watching. Since this behavior matters a lot, I consider this a fundamental mistake in the game design. At the same time, this behavior difference is somewhat minor in the grand scheme of things, so we shouldn't have two totally different monsters for these two behaviors. Rather, maybe one of the monsters is wearing spectacles so he could see the edge of the ledge coming and doesn't walk off, and the other isn't. Something like that. At the time, I didn't want to add a bunch more animation work by having another monster variant, since it was just hard to get all this stuff done. But I should have done it.
这样就能察觉了。像这里每只的话，都是会走到边缘会回来的。啊，这个 hard 就这个 hard。Boss hard， 哎，这不是那关吗？是一样的。Hunter phrase， 而且我记得这关好像最多应该有5个拼图，现在怎么只有？哦，哎，这里怎么还多了一个这东西？这个应该就是刚刚的关对吧 ？HUD， 看一下吧，什么东西
？Hunt in this world. This is one of my favorite puzzles in the game. Because again, you think you know what to do, you've seen this a couple times, you know, whatever, and you bonk them, but then you start noticing that, well, of course, they get unbonked when you're heading to the left, or they don't get bonked at all. And so you're like, oh, okay, I have to bonk them when I go to the right, but wait, I have to get back down there and bonk that other guy moving to the right, but now I have to get back over there, and I just unbonked that guy, and how am I ever going to do this? You know, I think this is one of the strongest combinatorial puzzles in the game.
Combinatorial.
In the sense that you really have to see, I can bonk them all, but I need to do that in order in their x coordinate from left to right. Once you work that out, and you have to go to the left, but not too far left because you don't want to unbonk that guy that you just bonked. And then there's a nice little lagniappe, I think, or, you know, there's a nice little joke at the end where you think that this scheme is going to fail
对，就那只。
Because you think, oh, well, okay, I planned this out so
那时候
beautifully,
你要跳2下
but wait, that last guy is to the right of the ladder.
啊，这个也算
Then, lo and behold, the gate itself is sparkly, and it's open now, and it's okay that he's alive at the end. And as a little extra thing, I was just feeling neighborly toward the trolls at this point, so I resurrected all of them before leaving the level.
Okay.
I just felt that was the
do
polite.
that.
That was the polite
happen.
thing to do, you know?
Yeah, they're your buddies, right?
Yeah,
they helped you
they-
get where you are today. You
Exactly.
should acknowledge them.
And it's true, they look a little grumpy, but who doesn't, you know? And so I just wanted to leave this level with them all alive.
I get you.
这是可能的。就当你拿到拼图的时候，直接 rewind 到起点，这样这些东西全部能复活的，这是可以做到。也就是说，你可以让6只全部存活的状态把拼图拿到，因为反正都是绿色的，这个都回来了。啊，这也是有底下那个的。哦，刚刚我怎么没看到？它这东西其实上一期录制的时候我就发现了。同样一关，当你从不同的门进来的时候，你看到的这个解说的位置其实是不一样的。这东西我确实已经发现了。这边是连在一起的 ，hunt free。对，那这边是可以的。这边是完全是连在一起。Boss hard 肯定看过了，问答无用。这边的话确认一下，应该是那什么6只怪那个女的采访是吧？
Having 6
对，可以。每次点开我一定把它看完。这边就操蛋了。
The idea for this level is that you need to
一样。这个是那5分钟对吧？5分15。然后你要从这个门走的话，就到到顶上了是吧？哦，这个居然是顶上的关是吧 ？Making exceptions to your own rules。那这个应该搞定了。哎，突然一看，底下那块拼图没了，看到没有？底下那块开发者解说突然就没有了。这个东西设计还是有点怪异的。然后当你从这儿走进去，可能又有了。对，这个点是有点烦的。It's not consistent。就同样你进到4-2是取决于你从4-1到4-2还是3-2到4-2，这两种进入方式你看到的这个解说是不一样的。虽然问题不是很大，如果你抖得清楚的话，或者说你完全无所谓这个能看多少是多少的话，可能问题不大。就这样，这个是没问题，然后就要往上走了，这个就难了。It's not going to be easy。来吧。看这个 ，How I thought about the music for the house level. House level 就是 Team's house。What? What's that? 顶上是吧 ？Mainum。什么叫 Mainum？Horse。2种乐曲，这下去肯定上不来了嘛。先听一下啊。这个应该是最后的成品吧？就刚进游戏一开始听到的就是这个 BGM。这是 Mainum， 这个 Horse， 那选个 Horse 看一下，来，这个音乐是什么
？Braid starts
5分43
directly to this screen, and the music for this level is the first thing
对的
that players hear. I think of this opening as one of the signature moments of the game,
Signature
but it's
moments.
pretty different from what I originally imagined. From the start of development, I had a picture of the mood and feel I wanted the game to have that was contrary to what most games had done. Platformer games of that time were, in general, produced as commercial products with a certain kind of polish that made them feel professional, corporate, not personal, not weird. But I wanted this game to be unrestrained emotionally, heartfelt, not composed, not protecting itself, not polished in a corporate video game
Corporate video
I
game.
wanted to imbue these properties into the game design, the visuals, the writing, and of course the music. My favorite band at the time was a group from Australia called the Dirty Three, who I knew about because Warren Ellis had played with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and I really liked the Bad Seeds and had gone through that process where you get excited and search out all the related bands that all the Bad Seeds were in and listen to whatever you can get your hands on. My favorite Dirty Three album was called Horse Stories, and that album embodied many qualities that I wanted this game to have. I especially liked the way Warren's violin was expressive and unrestrained, completely unconcerned with precise form or coloring within the lines. In addition to being the guitarist, Mick Turner also painted most of the band's album covers, and this style of painting also served as an example of the kind of fluidity I wanted in the art style. Though the final style of Braid does not look much like Mick's art, it was still a big inspiration when it came to my part of the art process, directing the game, choosing mood and general principles. So the picture I had was of an opening scene with striking visuals, with my favorite Dirty Three song, Horse, playing in the background. And while I was
Horse.
working on the game, Horse was indeed the music on this level for a while. Here's an excerpt so you can get a feel for it.
"讲道理其实也没什么问题的，只是因为你习惯了现在的曲子，所以你觉得这很奇怪。我的这个风格跟1-1B-1 2-1是吧 ？World 2一开始的关也不算是很不搭
I
吧
had doubts that I would ever be able to license a real song from a real band. How much it would cost, the legalities around it, what it might mean for the game's ability to last a long time. Even if I could afford a
啊
license,
，music licensing，
since it would have to be renewed periodically, that renewal could be denied at any time in the future, at which point the game would have to change or be removed from distribution. If I had to change the music, this could be costly, and if I couldn't afford that cost, I might have to take the game down anyway. And if I could afford it, changing the music might damage the feel of the game substantially. When you work so hard to make sure so many elements are put together just right, being forced to arbitrarily change one of those elements later is pretty terrible. Licensing music under these traditional terms feels like installing a ticking time bomb into the art that you're sweating so hard to make. I really didn't want to do that. Scouting around the internet, there was lots of music with perpetual licenses, but it was mostly low-effort session music made for commercials, radio intros and outros, and that kind of thing. It wasn't the kind of emotionally invested music that I wanted. But then I found an online music label called Magnatune that was relatively forward-thinking and that allowed for perpetual licenses. They could do this because they worked with musicians who weren't locked down by contracts with major labels. Most of these artists were less well-known, but this didn't matter to me. I was looking for good music, not big names. I realized that if I could put together a score for the game that came entirely from tracks on Magnatune, I wouldn't be creating this kind of time bomb situation. The Dirty Three were not represented on Magnatune, but I was finding reasons not to be so fixated on that song Horse in the first place. Though as a whole piece it embodied many of the emotional qualities I wanted, mechanically speaking, I didn't think that the beginning of the song fit so well in the role where I wanted to use it. It works much better in a context where energy has already been going for a while, not from a cold start on a level like this. So I dug around Magnatune for something that started slow, that started quietly, and I found Jamie Sieber's song May Nam, which I thought was amazing and perfect for the game, even though it was nothing like Horse. May Nam is slow, full of mystery, hinting at the majesty of seeing something very large. And for simple interactivity reasons, it probably works better than Horse would have. Since this house level serves as a nexus that you might walk into and out of frequently, a song that starts very slowly is probably a good idea because it results in a less jarring change to mood. It feels less like it's coming out of nowhere and less cut off when you leave it. The mood of May Nam then helped us steer the art direction for the scene, and the end result was what you have today. Many years later, and knowing what I know today, it's clear that it may have been quite possible to call up the Dirty Three and talk to them directly to see if such a licensing agreement was possible. But I never even tried. I was just discouraged by the whole landscape around music.
美 Nam 跟 Horse music licensing， 这个应该是后面的关了吗？还是说是专门的一个？啊，就是 conversation with Brian Moriarty， 啊，这是他的部分 ，Brian Moriarty， 啊，那东西还在 back， 这里还有个 back， 啊，然后这是能上去，会挂吗？它的设计感不会挂的，啊，不会挂的，还能往下，我操，这个尼玛真是天书啊！好，什么东西啊？什么乱七八糟？啊，从这儿回来，行，反正那边按顺序，不要太刚啊。alternative designs， 哎，那边两个已经看掉了，怎么一下子变灰了？这边应该怎么上去来呢？母鸡，搞去，按顺序，哎呀 ，This level was messy， 啊 ，just out of reach， 哇，这一关是不得了哎。而且为什么有这种？先看有别的东西。This is such a terrible level, mate. Unless you know how to play. 啊，练一下啊，打了。 啊，对，其实你走到这儿的时候，你就可以那个 rewind 了，真的要快的话。就可以了。嘛，虽然不算快，但このスピードはまあな得できますね。2个，那这个就一个，这怎么算？Movement by degrees， 啊，这是往前的一个什么？耶，这关もなかなかやばい呢，这属于一周目看那里地狱级别的关。但如果纯粹是为了拼图的话，我觉得你还是能有点耐心把它解决掉的。就那东西。先看这个。天坑。
This puzzle is a very clear example of partial solvability.
Partial
Which is
solvability。
nice because it gives players the hint that they're on the right track.
嗯，
It is not too hard to get a monster past the first 2 claws
但
just
第
by
三个很
walking
烦。
right to left down here on the bottom. But it's not possible to get the monster past the 3rd plant just by walking left because you're blocked by this huge block here. If you
Right。
try to climb the ladder to go over the block, it takes too long and the monster
Right.
dies on the 3rd claw.
啊，这个算 claw。
But this blockage is not too discouraging since the player has seen that it's possible and intended to get a monster past the first 2 claws, so he can try to think of how to change it up a little bit for the last one.
By
In
rewinding。
this case, using rewind to get up over the block more directly. There's an extra flourish for the last step in the solution. The player is likely to try rewinding up here to the block first, but the block is not wide enough to walk on it to the correct spot.
对的。
So either the player has to jump across the ladder to the left of the block, which is a little bit funny, or else he can realize that where he really wants to be, ultimately, is on the platform above the block. So he can go there first, then jump down, then rewind back up to it. By the time the player gets to this point, he knows he's hot on the trail to fully solving the puzzle, so he's probably in a good mood.
这里一次够吗？
This extra
能上去吗？
step provides a little extra surprise
Ah,
at
一
the
次
end
就够
the
了。
player was unlikely to foresee, and that adds a little bit more enjoyment, at least, hopefully.
哎，你确定不是 suffer 吗 ？Just like a pain in the ass. This level has nice partial solvability. 啊 ，partial solvability， 从这儿回来是吧？哦，靠，你这还刚好形成一个闭环了，看这个。
The core idea of this puzzle,
Ah, okay,
the
cut
core
was-
idea of this
Slash.
puzzle is as follows. You need to bounce off the monster,
啊，对，这个
thus
提示了
killing it to get to the right-hand side where the key
但
is.
其实你知道怎
But
么玩的无
only
所谓。
that monster can get the key out. So you have to find a way to resurrect the monster, which can only happen by traveling to the left, and then you have to get back across to the right in
对的。
a new way that doesn't kill him. This idea is structurally parallel with the puzzle on the left.
嗯，
In that one, you have to reverse direction in a weird way above a switch to reset it. In
对的，
this
这
one,
基本是一
you
样
have
的。
to reverse direction above a monster to reset it. Usually in Braid, when puzzle one, you have to reverse direction.
但这个地方其实不一定要上楼梯往左走的，因为你在它这关往左的话，怪不是不会挂的吗？所以你可以先稍微 rewind 一下，然后通过往左的状态下去踩那个怪的背，这样的话就可以你在踩的怪的背状态下跳过去，然后呢保证怪不挂。当然这个是 TS 相对稳定的肯定是上楼梯然后再过来。
In a weird way above a switch to reset it.
啊，
In
这
this
这也是
one,
没什么可以讲的。
you have to reverse
对，其
direction
实
above
楼
a
梯上来的比较
monster
好。
to reset it. Usually in Braid, when puzzles are in the same level, they have some kind of structural parallelism, even if it's vague. This puzzle on the right can be pretty rough to play, and it feels messier than it needs to.
Messy。
Because the puzzle on the left is also messy. These combined to make one of the messiest, and therefore maybe worst, levels in the game overall. It's messy for many reasons, but here's the biggest one. It's possible to just kill the monster right under this platform, enabling you to resurrect it with a small amount of air control just jumping in this area.
对的，对的，
Or
这就可以
if
了。
you run and jump at the very edge of the leftmost platform, you can kill him under the ledge on the right, then bounce up through it
这样就
so
更
you
快
can
了。
resurrect him just by walking in this small area. It's even possible for players to do this by mistake the first time, thereby not even realizing that there should be a more interesting puzzle here. Players don't know the intended solution to the puzzle, so it's likely they will try to get the monster back alive via trial and error with a bunch of air-controlled jumps, which will feel spammy and bad because the player keeps dying, yet there's enough positive feedback to keep going and eventually succeed.
Eventually
It's less
succeed.
likely they'd find the cleaner intended solution first. So for many players, maybe the majority, this puzzle would feel unfun and broken. At the time, I tried to find a way to avoid this, but was unable to do so. I shipped the puzzle anyway. For the anniversary edition, I also spent time trying to revise this puzzle and also failed to really fix anything, so I've left it unchanged. There is a fundamental problem, which is that you have enough air control in this game that, even if I somehow forced you to jump on the monster way over on the left or change the geometry of the landing platform, you could revive that monster, then keep bouncing off it to the left and then air controlling right to go forward in time, then switch back to the left at the last instant for the next bounce, and by doing this repeatedly, you could walk the monster indefinitely toward the right while keeping it alive. I can't figure out a way to ensure the invariant when you land on the platform. So the level is still messy in the anniversary edition. I used not to take the kind of messiness we see in this puzzle as seriously as I do today. Today, I would not find this puzzle acceptable, and I would try very hard to redesign it, making very large changes, and if I couldn't fix it, I would cut it from the game. Puzzles can really sing when they are simple and when they are clean, and now I aim for that whenever possible, in part because I know what to look for now that I have more experience. I've said many negative things about this level, but there are some good things about it. I like the weird feeling when you're running around to the right, chasing the newly freed key that you still can't reach. I like that after resurrecting the monster to get the key, you end up killing the monster again to climb up to the puzzle piece. I like that just walking toward the exit door from the beginning, you see the monster go into the tunnel not far from the key, and you see that if you could only continue rightward, he would get that key, but you're blocked here by this wall. The room up here with the puzzle piece makes a good excuse to have a higher platform from which to jump to the left. This nub on the left looks kind of like a wall or just a stopper to help bound the area, but at the same time it's obviously a flat area you can jump on, so this part of the solution feels completely fair. As I iterated toward a final puzzle design, I liked the idea that the player keeps looping through this central space in various directions. This pattern makes the puzzle a little more beautiful to me. There is a subtle piece of aesthetics that I don't think most players would notice consciously, but games are felt more strongly when these are in there. And after all, even with the unintended solution, the level did successfully embody its core idea of resetting things by crossing over them and back, though this might be hard for some players to see through the mess.
Through the mess. 所以这关呢 official solution 就应该是爬上这个梯子，然后再跳回来，最标准、最标准、最稳定。那话是这么说 ？OK， 然后就再往上了是吗？啊，再往上就更难了。Got you. Design monologues. Hard conversation. Hard face. 这有什么 hard 不 hard？ 啊，这绿光的关注。嘛，可以看个2-3期 commentary 来搞一波这个 speed run。没准我 take one 就能过了，不好说。反正暂时我不准备每关重新再练习。先完整打一遍，估计一下这个离45分钟到底有多远，还是说已经过了？Here we go.
David mentioned doing an initial darker version of the World 3 art,
Darker.
and that we then had a discussion about it and changed direction. When I realized that it felt wrong for what I was trying to do with the game, this seemed like a pretty uncomfortable conversation to have. There was a fair amount of art done for World 3 already, and it's a pretty negative thing to say, hey, stop, we have to redo this, and not use the work you've done on it so far, especially when you think the other party may not understand why you want to redo it, because what's there looks fine. Fortunately, David was a good sport about it, and before too long, we got to the current World 3. Since then, I've become familiar with this kind of activity. It's a basic part of my job and happens a couple of times every game. If you're trying to make something that feels well put together, while successfully doing something subtle with mood or theme, it can actually be quite delicate, and it's easy for a bad ingredient to ruin the soup. Someone has to be tasting this soup and occasionally say, no, this ingredient isn't the right one to get where we are trying to go. Another such conversation came up later on that was even harder. Before David had come on the project, when I was having a hard time finding an artist to do everything, I worked for a bit with Edmund McMillan, who has since become well known for games such as The Binding of Isaac and Super Meat Boy.
Super Meat Boy.
Back then, both he and I were unknown. He was working on other projects with the majority of his time, but he did art and animation for all the characters, which was very helpful in terms of making the game something better looking that people could actually play. After this, David came onto the project and did a larger volume of art for all the level's foreground and background objects. This took quite a while, and when it was done, I felt like I had a serious problem in that the game's overall art style was not coherent. Edmund's art is in a cartoony style, and David's looks like you see today, and the two just didn't mesh well together. They didn't create a uniform feel. I agonized over this for a bit, then said, hey, David, we need you to paint over Edmund's stuff in order to make the visuals uniform. And I informed Edmund of this as well. Most of the resulting characters hew closely to Edmund's designs, except for Tim, for whom we went through several revisions because I felt his look was key to the mood of the game. I felt bad that we painted over Edmund's stuff, but with years of hindsight, it was still clearly the right decision. But I suspect that a lot of newer independent developers would not have conversations like this because they're uncomfortable and may cause drama. It's much safer just to avoid the conflict and just roll ahead with the game that you have. But when it's the right thing for the game, you really should do it.
You really should do it. 啊，所以是 hard conversation。搞了一个这个调色盘，这款游戏跟那什么 The Binding of Isaac 啊 ，Binding of Isaac， 还有什么还有呢 Super Meat Boy 什么，那肯定是这么一个热度顺序。本作的热度是非常低，在这个一个多月前，我都完全不知道有这么一款游戏。另外两款游戏，他刚刚提到的，我是听说过的，起码听说过的，就说明本作的这个制作小组就不太在意这个什么商业宣传，这是核心问题。他们就只想做一个有趣的游戏，这个是很大的区别。Darker World 3， 这也没有 Darker 啊，这别的那个对话是吧？这哪儿啊？啊，这个地方是吧 ？Simplifying the pit， 这一会儿再过来吗？都一样的。底下有一片，这刚刚不是没有了吗？哎，等一下，刚刚不是没有了吗？刚刚不是没有了，怎么突然来了一片？也可能是这啊，刚起来，就这样。反正出现的位置是一样的。OK， 先按顺序，否则会乱的。Hard conversation， 来，这是 A small problem with Hunt's platforms 啊，就那个玩意儿 Platform waits on Hunt， 是不是看过了？啊，对，那个，当时我就想提出问題，这块东西之前我还没看过，我一直没看过。这应该看过了。
The idea for this level can't figure
5分
out
多
what give that all the is happening
Shoot my boots. KO.
If you bounce off this monster's head, starting from somewhere on its own platform, it seems almost like you can reach the platform on the upper right where you're trying to get.
这不可能。
Tim's arm gets to about the middle of that platform. As far as I'm concerned, that's a bit too close, and I'd like a way to fix that. We might try to move the platform you're standing on further left, but we can't because you'd have to move it so far that the actual good jump that solves the puzzle becomes impossible or nearly so. You might notice that the third floor of this puzzle is quite expansive compared to the first and second floors, and say, hey, why didn't you just move the third floor upward a bit, shrinking the height of that level and expanding the height of the second floor so the place you're trying to get is clearly too high. But the problem with that is, in the natural process of solving the puzzle, the player will kill the first 3 monsters and keep trying to jump off the 4th one to cross the gap, and I wanted the player to feel like he has plenty of room to jump around, not bumping his head on the ceiling all the time, because that would make the experience of trying to solve this puzzle more frustrating. Being physically blocked all the time or bumped around when things are already going badly can be mildly rage-inducing.
Rage
Instead,
inducing.
The ceiling right above the gap is a bit lower than the ceiling to its left in order to provide wider puzzle tolerances to make it more obvious that this is not the right
哦，
solution.
好像是啊，
So
现
the
在感觉
player
稍微
link rating. I wanted the player, but the problem
有
is
区别吗？
the time to its left into round provides or already later badly tolerance can be time because keep trying to off the fourth one to cross the gap.
哦，
Being physically blocked all the time or to jump a actual process of solving the puzzle, the player will kill the time because that would make the experience of trying to solve this. The ceiling right above the gap is a bit lower than the ceiling to its left in order to provide wider puzzle tolerances to make it more obvious that this is not the right solution. So the player does bump his head here, just not very much, and hopefully not in a frustrating way. The top row also needs space because you want enough room for the player to jump and not leave the top of the screen. And the HUD is up there, and it gets awkward if the HUD is covering your gameplay. We could have added more space and caused the screen to scroll vertically, but this level is just much better when you can see the whole thing at once. So, even though I was not happy with how high the player can bounce from this monster, I didn't see any solution that wasn't worse than the problem, so I left it as is.
再确认一下。
Having 6 monsters.
I report them to a little bit in them. On these hunt I'm with you in a structured direction from the like he HUD so if each cannot be
没问题啊。OK， 这样这个就清了。靠，这边你根本都啊跳不上去了，不是吧？我操，各一块是吧 ？Shaft 啊，这些就原来有，但后面拿掉的关系。难度倒也不是很大，这个东西不会随着时间变化的，就直接往上走了。Fuck off！ 这不死掉了吗？这帮人，这射击好蠢啊。然后呢？好啊，这个东西也是不能随时间变化的。那这怪不是压死了？ 这关能过？你确定这不是死棋吗？它不随时间变化的呀。那我不管怎么动，它都杆子都已经断掉了。What? Mate, this is annoying. Shaft， 这个能过？哎，这肯定做不到哎。那什么意思啊？而且这怪也不可能重新再出来了。这个难道是所谓的废关是吧？ 啊，这等一下啊，再看这玩 Haft Shaft Haft 耶，这种关拼图不可能拿到哎，怎么拿？我操，是怎么可能？ 但你光这样还不够是吧？然后你要再启动，哎，这能做到吗？ 启动这个杆之后立刻往前走，这不可能的呀，确实做不到啊。啊，要么就是直接，哎，这关我一看一下真没反应过来。啊，不应该往回的，不应该往回吗？啊，好像确实要往回的。哎，等下，我看这逻辑还不太对，有一点感觉，但不太对。啊，这样就可以。啊，好，哦，还真做到了。哎，这个关设计的，我觉得确实有很大问题。顶上的不行，还稍微再早一点。看懂了。但这个逻辑我觉得没说清楚。这块是什么的拼图？啊，这块是那个的拼图啊！不要下去了，下去再也上不来了。啊，有这么啊？看懂了，行。也说了那么母子库呢？要把东西送上来吗？这怎么可能送了上来？耶，这个好难呐、这问题你这个杆子一旦摸掉了之后，它再也上不来了。我怎么可能碰到这个位置？耶，这关太难了，这关太难了。看懂了。但你这个操作，你确定是？因为绿色不受时间影响，所以你只要不把它干掉，你可以不停通过 rewind 拿 team 来当跳板。但这个拿 team 来当跳板的思路，在主线拿拼图根本就没有出现过吧？应该根本就没有出现过吧？就这么玩啊？这个东西非常变态嘛，你需要不停的跳，把这怪蹦上来的。难度极高哎。差一点点，还得蹦上来的时候，你还需要把它蹦到内侧，否则不算的。 这个我觉得确实没设计好，这个有点太不正常了。这个拼图啊，呢，这 speed run 说可以讲呢？啊，这样就可以了是吧？啊，这样比较安全，原来如此，它是原来设计是这样的，对，这个才是原意，那就没问题。然后这里也就一次机会，出来，デキちゃったぞ。还有多少啊？啊，这边是总算是能看到头了嘛？这期肯定搞不定。Alternative designs， 这边要上来应该不难吧？啊，这里可以直接跳上来了。那还行，这可以稍微撤一下来。Alternative designs 的话是新的关是吗？啊，这个居然这么大！我操！原来是拼图是吧？Designs 那个是 Special Topics， 还有个 Alternative Design。啊，从这儿上不来。那搞了半天，这里还是一样的。而且一旦下来，你还能再上去吗？这个地方设计的好妖啊！看到流贼了。啊，这个是 alternative design， 还有一关，这干嘛呢？啊？怎么还有这么多东西啊？我操！Not the castle. End game plans. 我去啊！这个也是一个大关是吧？这个 alternative design 是个大关啊，就不能回去了。Shit my boots， 这先放一下。那肯定先把顶上的看掉了，这两个已经看完了，什么可以确认一下。啊，这是那个 the hard on hunt，heads up display， 没有新的啊。哎，这不确认，这东西。What determine the number of monsters on hunt？ 啊，这是那个问题是吧？原来是。好，总算看懂，它这个其实一个一个都是定过的，数量都是捆绑好的。你早看晚不看，到头来都是要看的。How should time work in Word 4? Design clouds that carry you through time and space simultaneously. Time, Word 4是那是什么 time 来着？啊，左右移动那个是吧？对 ，Word 3是那个绿光嘛。这应该是左右移动来操控 time。哎，啊 ，movement amplified。我操，就两个吗？这个地方我觉得只能走了，没了。
In this world, time moves as you move. You move to the right, time goes forward. You move to the left, time goes backward. Usually you're running on solid ground, but what happens if you're riding on a platform that is itself moving? If you're walking to the right, time for the world goes forward because of your motion. So, the platform being part of the world moves right. Since the platform is carrying you, it takes you even further to the right than you would have gone if you were just walking. So, time should go forward even faster because your speed through the world is faster than walking speed. If you're walking to the left, time goes backward in the whole world, and the platform, being part of the world, goes left now, because right was forward for the platform, left is backward. This carries you further to the left, which makes time go backward even faster than on solid ground. So interestingly, time goes faster in both directions. Riding on a moving object acts as an amplifier of the amount of time that passes, both forward and backward, as long as the object is moving to the right when time is forward. If the object is moving to the left when time is forward, it works against your walking speed, so it reduces the amount of time that passes, so you go more slowly, again, both forward and backward. Since before you get to this world, the game involves riding on lots of moving objects, the game would be incomplete if it didn't explore the interaction of platforms with the world for time behavior, and the player would miss out on some weird moments. In this level, I wanted the player to interact with a surface moving forward and a surface moving backward. I wanted them close to each other so you could see both moving at once. Usually in this game, the platforms you ride on are short, but the speed up or slow down effect would only happen momentarily on a short surface because you would walk off the surface pretty quickly, and that would be disorienting due to the rapidly changing speeds, and it would be harder for the player to understand what's happening and harder for us to make puzzles with. So I needed a way to make long platforms. Here I did that with cannons shooting clouds at a very fast rate, though on the right side of the level we have a comically large cloud that floats by for no apparent reason.
No apparent reason.
There are also some technical issues involved in making this all happen, doing the programming and working out the math, that are pretty interesting.
Pretty interesting. Oh, Infinite Series.
Suppose we're early in the design process and we're deciding how exactly time should work in this world. What happens if you're standing still on a moving object like a cloud? Should time go forward or not? You're not moving of your own accord, so maybe time should not pass. But you are standing on a cloud that has a forward speed, and that would be carrying you forward, causing you to move. So maybe time should pass at the same rate as it would if you were walking at the speed of the cloud. But if what causes time to pass is your actual change in position and you are not moving yourself, then even though the cloud has some speed, it has no time for that speed to turn into a change in position, which is what would move your body. So maybe time should not pass. How do we decide? We started with the idea time moves when you move. But now that we are looking at specific cases, we have to zoom in and really decide the details. This is common in experimental game design. A big part of designing the game is making decisions about how things act at a fundamental level. Doing this well is an art of its own, so it's hard to explain how to do it generally. Each case is a bit different, and the various minute details of your particular case, leaning this way and that, weighted more or less heavily depending on what you value, determine the proper outcome. That's one reason why I wanted to provide so much detail in this commentary. The specific details are custom to Braid itself, but perhaps some players can see how we practice the art of decision making beneath all the details and can take what they want of that philosophy and apply it toward their own pursuits. Anyway, what players see in a game are the concrete events that occur over time, and as a game designer, you are in some way designing those events. But you're doing it indirectly by designing the rules that give rise to the events and environments in which those rules act. What's important is the way those rules interact with player inputs to make interesting situations. To determine whether a rule is good, you look at the potential consequences of that rule in terms of the resulting events that occur during gameplay and try to predict what happens, or, when appropriate, actually implement the rule and see what actually happens. But we all have way too much work to do and can't implement everything, so at least some initial ground has to be covered solely in the designer's mind, judging ahead of time which rules are good. Then we can explore the most promising of these by implementing them. But even after you have many years of experience, predicting consequences could be pretty hard. A significant part of the beauty in the art of game design comes from surprise. Good rule sets generate surprise, both for the player and also for you, the designer. They give you more out than you put in. This means that the best rules can't be accurately judged in advance of being implemented. If you knew everything about them, they wouldn't be able to give you more back out than you put in. And that means that you're not tapping into the deep well of surprise that the universe makes available. So, making good decisions about the nuances of rules is greatly facilitated if you can perform actual experiments and see what surprises happen by programming a primitive version of the idea and playing around with it. In this case, whether time should pass when you are standing on a cloud, after some thought and some experimentation, I decided that time should only pass in response to direct player input. The time can be amplified by riding on a cloud or other platform, but no time will pass unless your character initiates the move. Why did I choose this? Firstly, when you're just walking on solid ground, everything is still unless you move. With the visuals and the audio, this creates the impression of a world that is frozen, but that reacts to your slightest move, and this impression is very strong. Since Braid is about different worlds, where each world has its own character, we don't want to weaken this character. Turning off the primary feature of the world as soon as you stand on a cloud or platform seems like a bad choice. It would weaken the impression of that world relative to the others. Although, maybe not too badly, since most of the time you're probably not riding on things. With the current rule set, when standing on a platform, you have 3 choices with respect to speed: time paused, time going backward, time going forward. The relative speed of backward and forwardness can be controlled by setting the speed of the platform. In general, analog differences are weak in puzzle games. Discrete differences in the play situation are much stronger. Puzzles feel better when actions are crisp and delineated by separate states. So, the version of the rules with 3 discrete states, forward, stopped, and backward, is probably better for puzzles than the one with 2 discrete states and an analog difference, fast forward, and slow backward. Though, this could be seen as subjective and a matter of taste. These are some of the reasons why I made this decision the way I did, but there are lots of other reasons too, and many of them are pretty subtle. This is common. This kind of decision making involves weighing a bunch of factors at various levels of importance and with varying levels of clarity. Then you keep working on the game, and as the game changes, sometimes the right decision changes. You keep doing this until you get something you're happy with, or as close to happy as is possible at the time.
好，这个食人花其实应该叫 Cloud Design Movement Amplifier， 这不连在一起吗 ？Infinite Series， 你这个传送门就给我传到面前了吗 ？Infinite Series， 啊，这个是吧？等一下，我去看右边看一下，这是把那个高处的搞完吧？因为高处要再过来很麻烦，还有2个门是吧 ？Cloud Design。 Infinite Series， 哦，这里居然有一个，哎，是否有一个呢？当时不是没有？だから俺こういう設定があまり好きじゃないな。Cloud Design， 啊，这个就是涌动了是吧 ？Cloud Design。
In this world, sitting on a platform is
对
careful.
Infinite Series， 这里还有什么东西？把这个看掉。你如果是别的关根本进不了这关。来，
Programming World 4 so that these clouds would work was pretty interesting. Every frame, a video game must know how long it should simulate the motion of its objects in order to make the rendered scene look smooth. For most games, the simulated time matches the real time measured by the clock on your wall. If the game is displaying at 60 frames per second, then each frame should represent 1/60th of a second of simulation time. Braid plays around with time very heavily though, especially on this world. Through World 4, we use the player's speed at the start of the frame to determine how much time should be simulated. But as explained in another note on this level, when you're riding on a moving object, this relationship gets very complicated. It appears to have an infinite regress, where your motion causes the platform you're riding on to move, which causes you to move even more, which makes time go forward more, which makes the platform move further, and so on forever. An unsophisticated implementation might run many simulation steps instead of one, simulating ever smaller amounts of time, until we decide that the residual amount is so small that we can ignore it. The problem is that running a simulation may require the computer to do a lot of computational work, which takes time. Running many simulation steps takes a lot more time than one step. And in this game, The amount of work to do in each step does not really decrease as we make the simulation time shorter. So, we would be in danger of taking too long to compute all the simulation steps, resulting in a low frame rate for the game, which would feel pretty bad. Fortunately, we don't have to do a bunch of simulation steps if we know a little bit of math. The result of walking on a moving platform can be represented as the summation of a geometric series, and provided the speeds of the objects you're riding on are reasonable, the series converges.
Converges.
It's representable in closed form very simply. We just need to do an extra add, a multiply, and a divide. Much cheaper than running many simulation steps. We'll cover the exact math for this in the next part.
哇，你还要讨论 math part？ 不会吧？这萌新瑟瑟发抖啊！对，这是 Cloud Design， 这个是 Infinite Series。哦，操，真的假的 ？Infinite Series 啊，这 Cloud Design 又回来了是吗？哦，行，这看完了。さあ次はあっちに行くわ。好，这个可能就是什么 The sounds when you pick up puzzle pieces 啊，这看过了。Nuances of gauging puzzle difficulty, the solidity of the puzzle frames. 3 easy puzzles. 妈，老样子，把这个高位的看完吧，就可以欧了。然后你发现这不过是 design 的 monologue 的部分，而且还有一个比较麻烦的 alternate 什么东西。哦，对，其中一个是看过，就是那音效了，是吧？音效看过了，
There's something about the sound like many games today.
可以再听一次，很好听。
Have the difficulty of each puzzle piece and assigned the appropriate effect. Here are the 6 puzzle piece sound effects.
Artist.
Of course, these difficulty games too seriously.
Right.
What's easy for some people is hard for others, which is something I saw very clearly watching people playtest this
对
game.
的，对的。
So I don't take these difficulty ratings too seriously.
Trivial or difficult. I mean, sure it's obvious to say like, yeah, this is trivial because you could just use spacebar, hop over and
Sure, yeah,
get
at the
it
very
and-
beginning it's obvious.
Yeah.
But you mean for later puzzles?
Mm-hmm.
It depends. Some things are easier to judge and some things are harder to judge. So, for example, we had this thing where we were talking about the last level in World 3, which has all these convoluted pathways and you have to figure out all the timings and all the things and dodge all the monsters. So that's automatically not easy because you have to do a lot of stuff just to get the thing. And then in addition to that, there's also stuff to figure out. So that is pretty clearly in the hard category. But some puzzles, you know, especially things toward the middle, some people find really easy and other people find hard. And it doesn't even necessarily correlate to anything. Like one person might find puzzle A easy and B hard, and another person might find puzzle A hard and B easy, right? But you could still sort of attempt in your mind to statistically weight that. Well, that's probably still harder than an easy puzzle. And if it's very hard for some people, maybe it should just be categorized as very hard, and then people who got it easier can feel better about themselves. Sort of the exemplar of that kind of thing that could be very easy or very hard for different people is the kind of puzzle where there's not much to do, but you just have to realize something that the game doesn't hint at very much. So for example, what I think of as the hardest puzzle in the game is this thing where you have to do like a really high jump.
哦，这关
We
系
talked
比较
about it in
影子
other
的是吧？
commentary. And there's really not very many steps. There's like 2 steps.
对 two
to the
steps
puzzle. So it's not hard that way. But it is very hard for most people to figure out what to do. Some people maybe got it relatively.
第一遍我没反应过来，第二次我才想到。
Depends on whether they
看到
thought
星
about
星
the
的思路
key
我才反应
idea
过来。
for the level, right? And I like that kind of puzzle. That's the kind of puzzle that's about epiphany, which happened a little bit in Braid and a lot more in The Witness. And I really like that kind of sudden realization puzzle. But the thing is, those often can be pretty hard.
Did you change anything after seeing playtesters go through it?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this elsewhere, so I won't go into too much detail, but the one main thing that I changed from playtesting, there were a couple, actually. So there was a thing with a bunch of platforms, like World 2 in general, used to be a lot harder because I was like, well, you have rewind, and so it's like about trying not to die and stuff. And just by watching people play it,
你这个设计得太
I was like, yeah, this really isn't that fun.
No,
like,
this is
anyone
not
can
fun.
make something really hard, so it's not that fun. So I narrowed down the number of places in which it's hard, and got rid of some stuff that was kind of funny. The other one major thing that I changed was a mistake, and it was I wanted. There were a few ways this came out.
他这个解说你可以发现，他基本上不是照稿念的，有点像什么呢？有点像现场一个主持人请了个大咖来采访，但一般这种面对面的面谈采访解说不太会超过2个小时，一个小时2个小时，再长的就不太多了，这也是科技发展的结果，因为现在这种交流 interview 采访很少面对面了，所以你基本可以开个 online meeting， 然后再开始发问，或者说这个开发者团队每个人对着电脑自己像我现在这样，跟录实况一样扯，所以就搞得很长，10多个小时，你难以置信。因为这款游戏从流程来说其实并不是很长，没有那么长的。如果你不卡关的话，打得快的话可能更快，因为解谜游戏嘛，2周目就变得很短，流程是不长的。它可以扯这么多，还是有点可以。如果是10年前的还好理解，因为现在你想这个节奏这么快的时代，他们出了这个周年重制版，周年重制版好像是2020年嘛，应该不是上架 Steam， 反正是可能就今年就是24年，但是这款在其他平台最早出来，应该也不会早于2020年，所以也算是最近的这个高清重制版了。但可以把这 commentary 搞得这么精细，还是可以，但听起来是有点意思，就感觉在听 lecture。
The way it is, but in World 2, there's a puzzle and there's a platform there, and there's some puzzle pieces that obviously you should be trying to get.
You should be trying
and
to
you can't
get.
actually get them with the first time you get there. You have to go further and get very specific puzzle pieces that help you solve.
下一关了，下一关的2篇。
Now, there are a few reasons that happened, and some of them are a little bit different. But one of the reasons is just because I saw people play the game early on and refuse to keep going if they couldn't figure out a puzzle. And I was thinking, oh, I want to communicate to people that if you're stuck, you can move on and do other things. And what better way to do that than have a puzzle that there's no real way that you could figure out to solve, right? And then you could come back to it later when you've done everything else and have a better feel for the game, and you're like, what was the deal with this one? And that was kind of bad, because I think the thing that's weak about that puzzle is that it's the only one in the game that you can't solve right away.
是的，只有一
And
次。
so, well, the two related puzzles. And that's actually bad, because it's actually a quite good property for a game to have, to be solvable right away anytime you see a puzzle piece. Like, oh, I can get to that. I don't need to find the grappling hook or unlock double jump or something, right? So, yeah, that was bad. Sometimes you can ruin your thing from playtesting. I would claim that most companies do ruin their game by playtesting.
真的吗？
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely struggled with that particular world because I was determined to get that puzzle. Yeah, that's hard. It makes sense that people would just want to keep going to see what else is out there. It's kind of like when you're taking a test and you might get more information about a previous problem that you were struggling with. Maybe keep going. So that's why people do it.
Yeah, but this was definitely a case where I saw one person just banging his head against the puzzle. It was probably a different puzzle even, right? Because the layout of the worlds was a little bit different and whatever, and I just saw him having a hard time and refusing to go on. And I was just like, look, I designed the game so you can just walk to all the other puzzle pieces. It's fine. Just go. I mean, I didn't say that because I don't comment when people are playing. I don't know. That made me decide to do things a certain way. And I don't know that it was the best outcome. Although I say elsewhere in the commentary, I'm also not sure how to have done it better because there are other factors.
I mean, you just have to make every door into the next level locked, right? Until you get all the pieces. If you wanted them to stay in that.
Well, that's how most
Slide.
games are
Yeah.
by default.
By
and I
default,
didn't want that, right? So, because it's sort of a bad property for a puzzle game to have, to like not let you play anymore if you can't figure out one thing. But you know, Portal 2 is like that, so people are used to it. So are most puzzle games ever made. Well, until recent, like iOS style games and stuff will do a thing where it's like, you need so many stars to get to the next level, and that requires only beating half the levels or something.
啊，对啊，Portal 传送门系列第一座跟第二座比这个 Braid 是要早是吧？基本上也算是那个年代的游戏了，但差不太多。早了 Portal 2好像就08、09年，Braid 应该是09年，差不太多，是那个年代的游戏。Portal 2的话是一定要解完一关才能打下一关啊，好像是的，对对对，但它没有拼图啊。就这个游戏给你一种错觉，拼图是收集项，可收集可不收集，其实不是的，拼图才是这个主线解谜的核心，是你一定要收集，你没得选，你不收集，那么看起来通关了，其实没通关。The Cloud Bridge， 哦，这个没打过吗？这我觉得看过了。这什么呢 ？Frame Puzzle Frames，Frame 是指的是什么 ？Frame rate 还是什么东西？之前看这关不是看到那什么高清低清的问题吗？啊，等完整把这个 design 或者起码把 monologue 看完了，可以来搞一期这个 speedrun。再说嘛，考虑到这个整合性，就这一个是吧？看来挺长的。
When I set out to art direct Braid, I had a clear idea in mind that the foreground and background should be very distinct so you were never confused. Foreground objects would have well-defined sharp details, whereas background objects would have a different palette and bigger, rougher strokes. The goal of this was to make it unambiguous what you would collide with. But there are some paradoxes built in. For example, doors are drawn as foreground objects even though you don't collide with them, because they are activatable things with very important functionality. I think it's fine and the doors are not a big problem. But I did feel after Braid had shipped that I had made a mistake with the puzzle frames. Because the puzzle boards are interactive, their frames were drawn like foreground objects with crisp details, just like things you can stand on. But here in World 2, we very explicitly have puzzle pieces you're trying to get where you'd like to be able to stand on top of the puzzle frame. And it looks like you should be able to. But the player has to experiment to discover he just falls through.
啊，所以叫 puzzle
This
frames
is perhaps frustrating in an unnecessary way, because this is exactly the kind of thing that the visual language of a game is supposed to take care of. In the anniversary edition,
这重置
we
修过了，
changed the
对，修
visual
过了。
treatment of puzzle frames to avoid this problem.
画框没了，这画框刚刚那个老板确实能，对，这明显，这画框确实让你感觉是能踩的，其实不行的，其实是要踩中间这个东西，就这样。这样的话把顶上的搞定了，底下有多少部分来着？啊，底下我估计还得重新上来了，送面多了。这两个应该搞定了，可以先简单确认 ，fuck you。这个一旦搞定的话，就这些了。你别告诉我是跳不上去了，哎，哈哈，マジか。啊，これクソしんどいな。最后的几个连在一起看比较好。Alternative design 倒稍微容易。クソうぜえな。啊，对，这个就是 hunt。OK， 这没问题。那就下一期去。这居然才是 monologue， 所以真的填坑。看看几期能搞定。总时长如果15小时的话，还真不一定15期能搞定。 哎，这次的拼图完全是，哎，这次居然有这样的拼图。靠，这个拼图就更难拼了嘛，就先这样，去了。